All right. Little late, a little after 6:30, but we're going to start. Today's tour are some obscure pieces from the collection, pieces that you don't see very often. Many makers that didn't make it, didn't find success. And we'll start off with also some of these are people who did find success, just earlier examples of their work. So we'll start off with the Lane Fox. Sorry, ironically, the lighting here isn't so great. So the Lane Fox was a lamp designed by St. George Lane Fox around 1881. His means of connecting the copper lead-in wires to the platinum wires, in the absence of a weld or a twist mechanical connection, Lane Fox actually used a pool of mercury. So you'll see that in there. There's a pool of mercury that is simply held in place by a wad of cotton and then filled with plaster. The filament is a vegetable type fiber, similar to what Edison did, but this was a plant called plumbago, which Edison also did experiment with for a brief time. The earliest Lane Fox lamps were actually tipless. They would have been exhausted out of the side. This example dates to about 1882. Most of these that survive were unused. They didn't sell well, and not really seen very much today. There's a letter here, not any content pertaining to electric lighting, but written by George Lane Fox, later St. George Lane Fox. Big part of my collecting is the paperwork, which goes along with this stuff really, really well. Helps you learn more about it, and makes for a more interesting collection and display. So move to another. Oh, I'm sorry. Lane Fox was in England. So here's another early English lamp. This is the 1881 style Swan. So, of course, Swan did become quite successful in his place in history. Upon merging with Edison in 1883, he was a successful designer, producer of incandescent lighting systems. His first, Swan's credited in many cases as having a successful lamp before Edison. Does not mean he had a successful system. We will do another video on Joseph Swan and go into that in more detail. But whereas Edison had a first working successful display of his full system by December 31st, 1879, Swan did not have a successful public installation until 1881. The very first Swan lamps for that type of installation is what you see here. The filament is attached with a very generous amount of platinum. The filament in this bulb is described as parchmentized cotton thread, which is not what he became successful for inventing, which was the squirted cellulose material, in which case he was way ahead of his time. In the United States, we didn't switch to using that material until quite a bit later. And this was, of course, made in Newcastle upon Tyne in England, in the first lamp factory in England. So this was the little teaser pic that I had in the post a few days ago. This is an interesting piece. Most people would attribute a design like this with the often called hook eye or loop-based lamp connection with a European, usually English, design developed by Swan. But this is actually made in America by Thompson Houston, which is kind of interesting because we think of Thompson Houston lamps as a fairly common base found today in antique lamps with a female center thread. The very first Thompson Houston lamps were baseless. And they are characterized by this sort of squarish shape, as well as a red glass, sometimes seen in blue, divider in sort of a V shape with a red glass divider separating the lead-in wires. The socket is as shown in the 1886 Thompson Houston catalog. The socket turned up separately from the bulb and was assumed to be European. However, it matches the Thompson Houston, and it is a Thompson Houston socket for this bulb. Moving on to the Vaughn Show. Sylvanus Vaughn Show was an inventor that didn't really find much success. However, he did some early work actually in 1892 in an electric car, which is probably more important than his electric lighting work. But the brief-lived Vaughn Show lamp was American, about 1887 to 1888. It has its own unique base style. I have never seen a surviving socket for this style of lamp. The interesting thing about Vaughn Show is, in an effort to evade infringing on Edison's patents, he did not use a complete vacuum. He used, or claimed to have used, a backfill of nitrogen gas. And many times such claims were not really real. They were claims, and most of these guys lost in court to Edison's attorneys. So this is a piece, I would say, in my collection of a non-Edison piece, this is definitely in the top 5. Try to rotate that a little bit. So this is a Bernstein. In many cases, people look at this base and call it a Heisler. There's a close relationship between the two companies. Bernstein invented a filament that was, it's going to be hard to show this here, but it is actually a braided silk. So the silk is braided over a round piece of wire. The wire is removed, so the filament is actually hollow. These were designed to be used on an arc circuit in addition to arc lamps without having to rewire or repower the system. This base was early on patented by Alexander Bernstein. Later on, it was used by Heisler, who had a system of incandescent lighting also based on using an arc circuit and to be combined on the same circuit with arc lamps. This particular lamp is important to me because it came from Dr. Hicks's collection, who was an early mentor of mine. And with its dual filaments, I just think it's one of the most beautiful early light bulbs ever made. So moving on, this is a Mueller. Mueller was sort of just another kind of Me Too European manufacturer. Didn't last long. Unique in its twisted form of the filament. Most Mueller lamps that are recorded in books, the surviving example in the Hammer collection, are actually tipless, and the stem is a little bit different. Interestingly, and as well as the means of filament attachment. So this was sort of attributed to Mueller, and then in the Dredge book, which is a really good early reference of, I think, about 1885, 86, on electric lighting, it shows the Mueller of that era exactly as this, with the tip on the top, and this type of stem and lead wire attachment or filament attachment. So just kind of shows the power of research material. We'll do another video on my library of research material. I can't stress how important that is to seek out that stuff. A lot of it can be found in reprints and or used books very inexpensively online. And studying that will really help you understand your collection better and help you identify things when you find them. It just makes you a better collector, I think. I think we may have shown this on the first video. Again, of the non-Edison top 5, this is surely it. So this is a lamp designed by Charles Perkins, about 1884, manufactured between 84 and 1886-ish. And Perkins went on to sell his patents to the Mather Company, then went on to having a fairly successful career in making sockets, switches, other pieces of electric lighting systems well into the turn of the century, into and past the turn of the century. This lamp is kind of one of the first, what would you call it, 3-way light bulbs. in that it has 4 filaments, so it's 4-way, and it has 4 8 candle power filaments, so you could light it as 4, 8, 16, or 32 candle power. The socket had a center contact, which was a common, and then concentric rings, which would make contact with the base, or these little springs. You can see they appear here as dots. And that would allow the socket to make individual contact with each filament, and each time you rotated the turnkey, another filament would light. Of the same era of Mather lamp, Perkins lamp, which you'll see here, it says, this is even marked the Mather Electric Company, and Perkins patents. Perkins is kind of obscured. But this is the standard early Perkins lamp. Similar attachment method. I'm sorry about that again, but with 1 contact for the socket. Later on, these were designed with a much more conventional base, which is now known and not commonly found, but they're out there of the people call it the Mather Perkins base. Either one's really appropriate. Moving on, this is the Sun Electric lamp. Marmaduke Slattery, interesting name. It's actually Marmaduke Marcellus Slattery. Started the Sun Electric Company around late 1886, early 1887. Manufactured this style of bulb. He had his own socket, of course, for its unique base. Sold dynamos, meters, all of the equipment for a complete system. By 1888, he had basically given up on this venture and went to work for Fort Wayne Electric Company, which had a fairly successful career there, and developed the Slattery induction system for Fort Wayne. You'll see that it is, it might be hard to see this, there we go, it is Sun Company patents. So, another one that you very, very rarely see, about 1887. This is likely a lone survivor. Was kind of a mystery piece for a while. The base on this lamp is designed to be modular. So this inventor made this modular base. He then made adapters that would mount to it for either a Swan European style base or an Edison base, which would have been used in the US or Germany as well. And then he also made this socket that would fit this bulb specifically. Everything here is in a fitted case. It's easy to call this a salesman sample, possibly. Might have been more of also the inventor's sample that he would have used just to try and market his product to somebody to buy it. And speaking of reference material, here it is. So the lamp does have a name. J. Krigel, not sure what else he did. Certainly more research to be done. This book is a bound volume of patents that was held at the Edison Lamp Works in Harrison, New Jersey. They would have kept these as part of their R&D process so they could see what other people had done to avoid infringement, or possibly take ideas, change them enough to not infringe and repatent the concept. These were actually being thrown out in the 1960s, and early collector of light bulbs, Edward Covington, who is no longer with us, managed to save them from the trash. And of course now they're a pretty incredible reference to some rarely seen patents and some more commonly seen patents. This next one is kind of interesting. Charles Richter, very little known about him, kind of another Me Too product. There's nothing totally unique. He probably stole a lot of his design work from Hiram Maxim. We'll flip this around in a second and show how this filament attaches. But it is a stamped paper filament, very much like a Maxim, ironically in a more stylized shaped M. rather than using the nut and bolt clamps that Maxim used, let's see if we can get this kind of staying. There are these discs where the leading wires have loops, and then there's little like cotter pins that hold the film, the clamp the filament in place, sandwiched between two platinum discs. Really kind of wild. Again, not much known. However, this early stock certificate did surface. And it is made out to Charles Richter himself, so probably didn't have a lot of investors outside of his own investment money in the company. So this is a Schuyler. Schuyler is a company that made an arc circuit-based system, so they made arc lamps, they made dynamos for arc lamps, and they made incandescent lamps. These incandescent lamps were also, like Heisler and Bernstein, designed to be used in conjunction with arc lighting. You'll see that the base is very unique. The tabs, the conductors are very, very close together with just a piece of mica separating them. There is also an apparatus inside that's coming apart here that was designed to short the lamp when the filament broke to maintain the series. The socket also was designed so that when you pulled these thin tabs out, the contacts would also short on the socket, so you could not break the series through either removing the bulb or the bulb failing. All right, so this one is kind of special. Not a lot known about it, but enough known to know that it sort of what it is. This particular bulb, I first saw a picture of one. This is one of two that I know to exist in a video that was made by General Electric at Neela Park. They have a small private museum there. I don't believe it's open to the public. And there was an example of this bulb. And for some reason, almost like a deja vu moment, I recalled reading about something like this as a kid when I first started collecting. Don't know if I really did, because I could not find any of the reference material that mentioned it. Certainly anything that I had at the time. So you'll notice it has an Edison base, a screw base, but it's glass. At the bottom, there is a center conductor, and the outer conductor is a brass ring. Interestingly enough, this screw base does not fit in an Edison socket. The thread pitch is correct. The diameter is a little too small. So, little detective work. This label here is a label that is found on Thompson Houston lamps of the early 1890s. And I have several in my collection that have identical shaped labels, marked exactly the same. This stem press is an Edison style stem press. I didn't mean to do that. However, it is also very characteristic of an Edison style stem press that was later adopted by Thompson Houston. Those lamps also have a very, very similar ball-shaped carbon paste filament attachment. So, going back to our books of patents, here we have the lamp shown here. It is assigned to the Thompson Houston Electric Light Company of Connecticut. The patent was filed on June of 1892 and issued October 1893. By the time it was issued, this would have been a product of General Electric and not Thompson Houston itself. However, the Thompson Houston factory did operate for a while as its own entity, continuing to make the Thompson Houston lamp and sold under the GE name. So what this seems to be is a lamp that would have had adapters to fit multiple sockets. So there would have been, and I've tested this theory by taking an Edison base, cutting off the bottom, a late cheap Edison, nothing of any value, cutting off the bottom It then threads over top of these threads. The bottom would curl around, touch the outer ring, making the threads a conductor, and then it would screw into an Edison socket. And then you can imagine there would be similar style adapters for Thompson Houston, Westinghouse, and Westinghouse bases, probably not any others by the time this was made. I can't imagine this was ever actually put into production. Very much likely a prototype. Try to use that word carefully. But nonetheless, an extremely rare example, and definitely falls into the category of obscure. So the last piece we're going to show is made by Girard, which is a French maker. Most of what Girard made were battery-operated lamps, very much novelty demonstration devices, not really practical for lighting of the house. He had his own unique base, if you call it that, which you'll see here. In fact, you can even see Girard's name there. Very few Girard lamps survive. This one is very interesting in that it is a complete lamp. The lamp has a switch that would allow you to light 1, 2, or 3 bulbs. Binding posts at the bottom. Again, this is low voltage, likely designed to be run off of batteries, though Girard did also design and make an early hand-wound dynamo. This particular example of this lamp is interesting in that at the bottom, you'll see the label here from when it was entered into the exhibition of the Paris Electro Exhibition of 1889. So this was an early demonstration piece used at the Paris exhibition, which is a pretty well-known early electro exhibition. Edison was there, all the major players were there. So pretty special surviving piece. So that wraps it up for the unusual and obscure. We'll pick another topic, hopefully do it next week. Thanks everybody for joining in.